Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something really quite intriguing, a global trend. It's about nuclear energy and the significantly different levels of support between men and women.
Ah, yes. That's a fascinating one.
We've gathered quite a bit of research, survey data too, and it consistently points to this gender divide. So our mission today is really to unpack why. Why is this pattern so persistent?
Exactly. We're seeing it across so many countries. The data just shows higher net support for nuclear power among men compared to women. Consistently.
We're not just going to point it out.
No way. We're diving deep, looking for those underlying factors, what could be driving these quite distinct perspectives. We want to give everyone a clearer picture of this interesting dynamic.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male-female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Small drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
We gathered quite a bit of research, survey data too, and it consistently points to this gender divide. So our mission today is really to unpack why. Why is this pattern so persistent?
Exactly. We're seeing it across so many countries. The data just shows higher net support for nuclear power among men compared to women. Consistent.
So we're not just going to point it out.
No way. We're diving deep looking for those underlying factors.
Yeah.
What could be driving these quite distinct perspectives. I want to give everyone a clearer picture of this interesting dynamic.
Okay, so maybe let's start with a bit of context. How did we even get to this point with nuclear? It wasn't always so controversial, was it?
That's right. If you go back to the mid-20th century, there was actually a lot of optimism, a real buzz around it.
Like a miracle energy source.
Pretty much, yeah. People saw it as potentially limitless clean energy. But, well, that initial sunny outlook, it's definitely shifted for a lot of people over the decades.
And I guess some specific, pretty big events must have played a part in that shift.
Oh, absolutely. Undeniably.
Yeah?
You have major nuclear accidents, like 3 Mile Island back in '79.
Right, yeah.
Then Chernobyl in '86, which was huge globally. And then more recently, Fukushima in 2011.
Yeah.
Those events had a profound impact, a really deep impact on public perception. For many people, they kind of solidified fears about safety, about the risks tied to nuclear tech.
Okay, so bringing it back to the present and looking globally, our sources really hammer home how consistent this gender gap is.
It really is striking. When you look at net support, that's basically supporters minus opposers. Men just consistently show higher positive feelings about it across all the countries we've looked at.
And it's not always just a small difference, is it? The size of the gap is sometimes, well, it really jumps out.
It does. I mean, in some places, the difference is fairly minor, but in others, it's frankly enormous. The research really highlights this.
Got an example?
Sure. Take Norway, big one. Women there show a net support of -8%, so slightly more against than for.
Okay, -8.
But men, they clock in at plus 47% net support. 47.
Wow. That's what, over a 50-point difference?
Over 50 points, yeah. It's a massive divergence of opinion right there in the same country.
That really throws into relief how differently this tech is viewed. And you said Belgium is similar?
Belgium shows a similarly wide gulf, yeah. Men significantly more supportive. It just underlines, these energy technologies aren't seen in isolation. Different groups can react very differently.
But it's not always that huge a gap, right? There are exceptions.
Exactly. It's important to look at where the trend isn't quite so dramatic. India, for instance.
Oh, okay.
The gender gap in net support there, only around 2 or 3 percentage points.
Yeah.
Much, much smaller.
2 or 3 points versus 50.
Yeah.
Quite the contrast.
And the UAE also shows a more modest difference. So it's not universal in its intensity.
These smaller gaps are super interesting. Do the sources give us any hints about why places like India or the UAE might be different?
They offer some interesting angles. In the UAE, for example, some data suggests women's concerns about nuclear safety aren't actually much higher than men's, sometimes similar, even slightly lower in certain metrics.
Maybe it goes against the grain.
It does. And it might be linked to, well, a strong government push. They're really promoting nuclear as part of their clean energy plan.
Oh.
And maybe there's just a higher level of public trust in big state-led projects there. That could play a role.
That makes sense. If the message comes from a trusted source and it's framed positively, maybe that levels the perception across genders more.
Precisely. And India.
Yeah.
The smaller gap there might reflect different cultural norms, perhaps different levels of engagement with the topic across genders. Maybe access to information varies. It's complex.
But these exceptions really drive home that it's not some fixed biological thing, right? Context matters. A lot.
Definitely. Local factors are key.
Okay, so here's something that really stood out to me from the research. This gender gap we're talking about. It isn't just a general thing about big energy projects.
Right.
It's significantly wider, specifically for nuclear energy, much more so than for, say, wind or solar, or even gas with carbon capture.
That's a crucial point, a really key insight.
Huh.
While women, on average, might express slightly less enthusiasm for large-scale energy infrastructure generally, the fact that the gap balloons for nuclear specifically, that strongly suggests there's something unique about nuclear itself driving this difference.
Which makes you ask, what is it about nuclear?
Exactly. What are those specific elements?
So what are some of those different perspectives, the different maybe lenses that men and women tend to view nuclear through, according to the research?
Well, the data consistently points to some interesting average differences. For men, on average, we tend to see higher levels of something called technological optimism.
Technological optimism. Okay.
Think of it as maybe a greater readiness to see technology as the solution, a stronger belief that we can manage complex tech safely.
So more focus on the potential benefits, maybe.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
More likely to see nuclear as a vital tool against climate change, for example, and maybe more confidence in the regulations, the safety frameworks that are in place. Often, a greater acceptance of the inherent technological risks.
Okay, so that's one side. What about the average perspective highlighted for women in the data?
For women, again, on average, the data indicates a stronger emphasis tends to be placed on the potential downsides, the hazards, the risks.
Like what specifically?
Things like safety and health concerns seem more prominent, the risk of accidents, obviously, but also the potential effects of radiation exposure, even low level. And the big one, what do we do with the waste? The long-term storage challenge.
Right. The waste issue is huge.
It is. And there is often a greater focus noted on environmental consequences, too. How might accidents or waste affect ecosystems, communities, and, importantly, the sense of concern for community well-being, for family, especially the long-term impact of failures on, future generations.
But we absolutely have to stress here, these are averages we're talking about based on large data sets.
Crucial point, yes.
Yeah.
We are absolutely not saying all men think one way and all women think another. That's just not true.
There are plenty of women who are pro-nuclear and plenty of men with serious safety concerns.
Absolutely. There's a massive spectrum of individual views within both groups. But these average tendencies, they show up consistently in the data, pointing towards this general divergence in how nuclear is perceived.
Okay, so let's dig a bit deeper then. Beyond these general outlooks, the tech optimism versus the safety concerns, what are some possible underlying reasons for this gap being so consistent? The sources suggest a few ideas.
Yeah, there are several potential contributing factors. One that comes up a lot is the role of, let's call them cultural narratives, and how the media portrays nuclear energy.
How so?
Well, think about how nuclear incidents are often shown. Documentaries, movies, news coverage. It's often very dramatic, isn't it?
Yeah, usually focusing on the worst case scenarios.
Exactly. The potential for catastrophe, widespread contamination, that imagery is powerful.
And the idea is that these kinds of dramatic, often negative narratives might just resonate differently, maybe fueling more caution among women on average?
That's certainly a strong possibility the research explores. Another angle is historical patterns in education and careers. Both things are changing, of course.
You mean like STEM fields?
Precisely. Historically, women have been underrepresented in science, technology, engineering, math, including nuclear science and engineering specifically.
And the thinking is, more familiarity might change perception.
Potentially, yes. A deeper understanding of the science, the safety protocols, the actual engineering involved that could influence how people perceive the risks, maybe make them feel less abstract, more manageable, leading perhaps to greater support.
That makes intuitive sense. Less fear of the unknown, maybe?
Could be part of it. Then there's this whole field of risk perception psychology. It's fascinating stuff.
Cool.
It basically suggests that, again, on average, men and women might evaluate and react to different kinds of risks differently.
How differently?
Well, some research indicates men might be perhaps more inclined to downplay certain technological risks, maybe focus more on the benefits, whereas women might be more attuned or sensitive to certain risks, especially maybe those invisible dangers.
Invisible dangers, like radiation.
Exactly. Radiation or things with very long-term uncertain consequences like waste disposal. That feeling of an unseen, potentially persistent threat could understandably lead to more caution or concern. It's like, how different people view the risk of flying versus driving. Perception plays a huge role.
Okay, that's a really interesting psychological angle. What else?
That's one more big one.
Yeah.
Policy framing and trust. Trust in institutions.
Like trust in the government or the nuclear industry itself?
Exactly. In countries where people generally have high trust in the government and the agencies overseeing nuclear power, well, the gender gap in support might actually be smaller.
Why? Because everyone feels more confident in the safety measures.
Plausibly, yes. If both men and women trust the reassurances, the gap might narrow. But where public trust is low, that could really amplify the divide, especially if women perhaps tend to be a bit more skeptical of official statements or industry assurances on safety.
So low trust could widen the gap. That's quite revealing.
It adds another layer, definitely.
Let's circle back to some of those specific countries again. Brazil was interesting. You said small gender gap, but overall support wasn't super high.
Yeah, Brazil's a bit of a paradox, according to some data. A relatively narrow gap, but overall support is just kind of moderate, either strongly for nor strongly against overall.
So alignment between genders doesn't automatically mean high support.
Exactly. It suggests that maybe both men and women in Brazil share a similar level of caution or perhaps skepticism about nuclear power, leading to that narrow gap, but not a big wave of enthusiasm.
And the UAE is still fascinating. That finding that women's safety concerns might be lower or similar to men's there.
It really stands out, doesn't it? And again, I might link back to that strong state promotion. Nuclear power is being presented as this key pillar of modernization of their energy future.
So strong government backing, maybe high public confidence in those projects.
That seems like a very plausible explanation for the unique profile we see in the UAE data. It could be shaping perceptions across genders more uniformly than elsewhere.
Okay, one last observation from the data that seems important, the don't know responses.
Yes. Very important.
Consistently, a higher percentage of women tend to select don't know or neutral options when asked about nuclear power compared to men. What can we read into that?
It's a really significant finding. It strongly suggests there might be a need for, well, better information. Or maybe different kinds of information and engagement.
Targeted information.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Information that directly addresses the specific questions or concerns that women might have. Things about safety, environmental impact, those long-term issues we talked about.
So it's not necessarily opposition. It could just be unanswered questions.
It could well be. That higher don't know rate might signal either a lack of information that truly resonates or perhaps a feeling that their specific concerns haven't really been adequately tackled in the mainstream discussion about nuclear.
So wrapping up this deep dive then, it seems pretty clear. There's a real, significant, and quite consistent gender gap globally in how people view nuclear power.
Definitely.
And crucially, this gap is notably wider than for many other clean energy options.
Absolutely. And the key factors driving it seem to boil down to a mix of things. Different levels of, let's say, tech optimism versus risk sensitivity, varying weights given to safety and environmental concerns, the powerful influence of media narratives and cultural stories, and also the roles played by education, familiarity with the technology, and that crucial element of trust in the institutions managing it all.
It really makes you appreciate the complexity, doesn't it? How people perceive these huge technological choices. Understanding these different viewpoints seems essential.
It really is, especially moving forward.
How so?
Well, it leads us to a final thought, really, something for everyone to maybe mull over.
Okay.
How can understanding these different perspectives, why men and women, on average, view nuclear differently, how can that knowledge help us have better conversations and make smarter policy decisions about our energy future, especially, with climate change, demanding urgent action? What specific questions, what worries about nuclear might be creating such different viewpoints? And how can we foster a discussion that's more inclusive, more informed, one that really acknowledges and addresses these nuances? That's the big question, I think.